All right, we are reconvening at 3:05, public meeting number 88, and we are going to item number 8, research and problem gambling. Mark Vanderlinden, Director.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good afternoon, Director.
Good afternoon.
All right, so I have a couple agenda items here. First on that is to talk about a report that we have due on November 22nd. According to Section 108 of Chapter 194 of Acts of 2011, we need to provide a report of activities under Section 71, which is the research agenda, that will be submitted no later than 2 years after the effective date of the Act, which is November 22nd. So I've been working with our Sigma team to craft this report. I think the report in general will provide a good overview about well, several items, but it will certainly meet that mandate. The report's going to give an overview of the research mandate, what was our process for procurement for this project, a description of the approach used by Sigma, including the details of the methods that they're using, and activities from the point which they started in April to date, and then at the end, what are the recommendations for ongoing research activities of the Commission. I'm certainly not going to read the report, but
Come on.
okay, well, here we go.
It's only 50 pages.
Don't even
Yeah.
think about that.
Commissioner McHugh's losing his sense of humor.
This is serious. You know, I certainly won't do that, but would welcome any feedback that the commissioners may have on the report. Our goal to get this rolled out on time would be that any feedback from you all would be received by next, I guess next Thursday, the 14th of November, and that we would then begin doing the final draft of it and have it released on the 20th of November.
You're still missing the executive summary portion.
Exactly. The reason, thank you for pointing that out, the executive summary, we wanted to wait to draft that until we saw if there was any feedback from you all to make sure that was included in there.
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but we will. I doubt we're going to have anything very substantive to add, but we will get back to you by then.
Okay, fantastic.
Is there a soft copy available someplace?
I can make sure that you get an electronic copy.
It's a soft copy.
An electronic copy?
Oh, electronic.
Okay.
No, it's easier to make comments.
Yeah, okay.
Just, I mean, the few that will come.
Right.
I
We
would.
expect a line-by-line edit, Commissioner.
No, you know, don't worry about that.
I would like to turn it over to Rachel Volberg, who's the principal investigator, to just give us an update on where the project is at this time.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Great.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Very long afternoon, long morning for you, I guess, before lunch. So we're going to try and take only a very small amount of time. I want to start by proudly introducing our project director, Amanda Haupt. Amanda started with us on September 30th, so she's been with us just a little over a month, but she's done fantastic work already, which this report is the first big deliverable that I put on her to-do list.
Great.
Great.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be on the project.
Great.
You say that.
Well, that's a big job. You had to learn what's going on pretty fast. Great.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is just two things today. One is to just give you an update on some of the major activities that the project has been engaged in, and then to proudly show off, another proud show off, the website that we've been developing for the last few months. So to start with, the major activity that we set out with at the beginning of the project was we knew we had to get the baseline population survey into the field as quickly as possible. I'm happy to report that field work started on September 11th of this year, and we are already at 2,600 completes. So we are on target as far as where we expected to be for data collection at this point. The online panel survey, which was the supplemental sample of folks who are interviewed through or sampled through a separate source, was somewhat delayed. We had some IRB approval issues, but we were able to start field work earlier this month, and we are at 675 completes on the online panel.
With the target, what's the target?
The online panel could be completed very, very quickly, much faster than the,
What's the number?
the ultimate number is 5,000, but the 675 is 81% of the released sample, which was 833 email addresses that were released. So the online panel is rolling out more slowly so we can match as closely as possible the fieldwork periods, so we don't get like a temporal effect, you know, that might affect one or the other of the samples.
Right.
We are still working with the commission on figuring out the strategy for the targeted sample, which we are hoping to piggyback on the baseline survey. There's an additional 1,000 interviews that we want to do focused on the host and surrounding communities of the successful slot parlor application. But for a number of reasons, the geography is still sort of up for debate. So we need to finalize that fairly soon so we can begin the process of negotiating an amendment to the ISA between the university and the commission, and then a subcontract amendment with NORC, which is doing the data collection. One of the other main activities we have on the project is the problem gambling services evaluation. We have obtained the helpline data from the Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling, and we are currently analyzing those data to I believe we look back into 1997 on those data. So we're going to have 1997 through 2011 to look at. We are also in the process of preparing a online survey for treatment providers who have been certified as able to provide problem gambling treatment in Massachusetts, and we're going to survey them about their experiences and sort of what their clientele look like, and get their ideas on how they think treatment services can be improved in Massachusetts. We have a lot of secondary data that's going to be described in detail in the report that you have in terms of the specific impact areas that we identified in our proposal, how those are sort of being translated into specific secondary data sources, and how we plan to bring all of those data into the project to be able to analyze them and make sure the geographies are consistent. We have a number of options that we're considering for regional definitions related to labor markets and suppliers and consumer spending. We're also rethinking the options that we want to use for our purchase of the REMI model, which was going to do the economic forecasting. I guess my main responsibility has been to make sure that the economic impact team and the social impact team keep talking to each other so that we make sure that we have consistency across those two big pieces of the project. And then finally, we have our data management center, which is being built, housed at the School of Public Health at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. We have a number of plans for establishing protocols for data sharing. Ultimately, as per the wishes of the commission as expressed in the RFR, we want to make as much of these data available to the public as possible. and other data that will be available to other researchers. So it actually requires a lot of planning and thought ahead of time to make sure that people's identities are protected, to make sure that when the data are provided to people that they are of utility. So we're doing a lot of thinking around that set of issues. And last but not least, we've been designing a website. And so we went live yesterday with the website. We've had 8 unique visitors.
All right.
So we are now the 9th unique visitor, I believe. But I just want to talk a little bit about this website because it's basically going to be the world's portal to our study. And we gave a lot of thought to who might be interested in the study, what they might want to see from the study, and so trying to think about how to communicate with a lot of different audiences. So there's sort of 2 design components. We had a web designer who we worked with at the university. He really did a great job, I think. So we sort of divided it into kind of the look and feel of the website, and then thinking about the content areas. So I want to talk a little bit about the look and feel. The first sort of piece of look is we developed a logo. You can see that at the top of the page. Under the 150 years at UMass Amherst, we have our Sigma logo. The round piece in the middle is the state of Massachusetts superimposed on a coin, which we sort of went back and forth a good bit. We didn't want it to look too much like gambling, but the idea is that it evokes gambling, but also at the same time evokes the many different pieces of the pie in terms of impacts that we're trying to look at. In terms of the images that you see, we've got 3 different images on this home page, and then there's images on the remaining tabs as well. We very specifically wanted to have a balance of neutral, positive, and negative images. So on this page, for example, we've got here we go. It'll do it by itself. There we go. So we've got a gambling image, which we felt was neutral. We've got a construction image, which is the positive. And then the last image, see if I can get it to go, is traffic, which we thought sort of evoked a little bit more of what people tend to think of as the negative part of the proposed expansion. At the bottom, let's see, yeah, can you manage that? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make Amanda do the stuff while I do the talking. At the bottom of the page, and in fact, at the bottom of every page, can you keep going down? Yep. We have an acknowledgement of our source of funding. And actually where the Massachusetts Gaming Commission actually is named, there's a link straight through to the commission's website. So we felt that was important, and we put it on every page. This home page is, so now I'm moving into the content areas. This is intended to be a succinct summary of the project and what's going on. So that's on the left side of the screen. On the right side, there are news and highlights specifically of the project. And then if you go back up, and we'll click over to the news tab. So we wanted to sort of focus on the home page. We're focusing on just on the project. On this news page, we are carefully selecting stories that appear in the news that have to do with events related to the casino expansion that we feel are potentially going to affect our work. So these are all decisions that were made recently in the Commonwealth that could potentially affect where we are sampling for the targeted sample, for example, and things like that. Further down, and you don't have to page down there, Amanda. Further down, there's a number of items that are focused on things where the project has actually, or frankly, I have been in the news for something that's not necessarily project related. And we are planning to separate those out so that the news that's specific to what the project may do will be separate from, any time that we appear in the news. I think Mark was the one that made that suggestion, so we just haven't implemented it yet. On the right-hand side, we have a couple of other news related issues. The topics for debate is intended to give us a place where we can highlight discussions within the research community about the work that we're doing. And then further down under the Massachusetts Gambling News, we have a link to the Gaming Commission and the news portion of your website. And then the Springfield Republican and Mark Arsenault's In the Cards blog, where there's a lot of stories about what's happening in Massachusetts with expanded gaming. Moving on to the people. We have two tabs under people. One is our executive team, so you can page past me. And down to Ed Stanek and Rob Williams and Dan Hodge. The four of us continue to meet once a week. We never seem to be at a loss for things to talk about. But that's only the executive team. And then we have the project team. We wanted to highlight all of the people and organizations that are a part of this project. These are our expert advisors. Lori Salami at UMass Amherst, Mark Nichols at University of Nevada, Reno, and Natasha Dow-Schull at MIT. Moving down, we have our project and data management team. There's Amanda and Martha Zorn, and Sophie Bryan is the RA who supports the Data Management Center. The social team is Professors Pudel and Rodriguez Manguillo, as well as the two RAs who support their work. And then the economic analysis is is under the oversight of Dan Hodge on the executive team, and then he has a number of people over at UMass Donahue Institute. We're in the process of trying to decide if we can get pictures of them, but in the meantime, we took their logo from their organization. And then down at the bottom, we have data collection, NORC, and Ipsos Public Affairs, and Market Street Research, which is in Northampton, Massachusetts. Let's see, so next is publications. This page is going to be substantially built out. Right now, all we have here are two documents. One is our theoretical framework, the report that Rob Williams and his colleagues prepared, and then our own research plan. But over time, we expect this to be greatly expanded. Definitely.
Like the report to the legislature will go up there, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, actually, that's going to be a commission report, so.
Oh, that's right. Well, whatever, yeah.
I guess we could put a link
Both
to it and
places,
say,
yeah.
thank you, commission. This page is, really speaks to the multitude of audiences that we feel that we need to speak to. The research links are basically everywhere that I am aware of that has a gambling research initiative underway that funds work. And it's it's listed alphabetically because we couldn't come up with a better way to do it. On the right-hand side, we have sort of been switching in and out, but this particular research spotlight is an interesting article in Scientific American that talks about the similarities in brain activity between drug addiction and gambling addiction. So it's, you know, sort of what's new and interesting in the research realm. The regulator links and the problem gambling links are both under these, in this area, they're organized in the same hierarchy in these two areas. So we have, first we have Massachusetts, so the Gaming Commission, once again, there's a link to the Gaming Commission. We have regional links. We figured that there would be interest in going through our website to other states in the Northeast, or certainly in New England, that have gambling issues, and then the national regulatory agencies. And then a couple of spotlights on the Expanded Gaming Act, and once again, the commission has a direct link. So there's lots of ways to get from us to the commission. And then on the problem gambling links, the same sort of hierarchy with the Massachusetts Council first, and then our New England compatriots, and then a link to the National Council. And then also on the right, some information about Gamblers Anonymous and calling the helpline. And I believe, is that last but not least?
A question.
Yes.
The police officer there, that is supposed to signify.
So yeah, if you go back to the homepage has 3 images.
Right.
And then if you go to news, it's a neutral image. People, I think we went with a positive image. No, we went with a neutral image there too. So this was sort of to try and get a mix of sort of positive, negative, and neutral images. We're certainly open to
So the
changing
police
it out.
officer is the negative image?
It would be a positive image.
It would be a positive
Commissioner.
image, but it would be a positive
Well,
image,
you would just
but
show the
addressing the negative issue of crime.
I see.
Fixing the negative issue of crime.
There's 2 positives in that segment.
That's right.
Go cops, go cops.
Okay?
Sticking up for our
Okay.
industry.
It's obviously been a long day. We're almost finished here. And this is the last tab that we'll show you. We're asking for people who want to contact us that for all inquiries except media, please contact Amanda. But if you're a reporter, you need to talk to me. And I think that's it.
We all, obviously, Michael and Elaine want to make sure that our site has a prominent spot on it to get to this and I'm sure that'll happen soon if it hasn't happened already.
We had a meeting with Elaine maybe 3 weeks ago to preview this with her and discuss ways to make sure that the commission is highlighted appropriately, given appropriate credit, and then also to make sure that if it hasn't happened already, we'll make sure that the links between the 2 sites happen too.
Yeah.
I think it'd also be helpful for Rachel, for the media inquiries you get, not necessarily to your answer, but the subject matter would be good information to share back and forth.
Oh, that's a good idea, yeah.
And when you get press inquiries, do you touch base with Elaine before you take them, or how do you handle that?
So far, I have not gotten any press inquiries about Massachusetts.
Right.
I've gotten, there were a number of reporters that I talked with around the Connecticut Keno issue. There was another one. You know, I speak with the media quite often and have for many years. Not all of them, in fact, relatively few of them know about what's going on in Massachusetts, so I
Right.
have taken the opportunity to say I'm working on this really great project and,
Right.
you know, pay attention to Massachusetts. But so far, I haven't had any.
Okay. Well, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but it's worth thinking about, particularly when stuff comes out that is of note.
Yeah.
We are very careful to coordinate and think through what we say and how we handle it, and making sure there's a close connection between you and Elaine.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, great. It's terrific.
Great.
Looks really good.
I want to mention just one thing. From this morning, a recurring theme was this notion of, some of these applicants and surrounding communities are studying impacts in the future and having this look back provision in their. So I look forward to the notion that you say about sharing data. But also that could go two ways. If we could also obtain data, that's out there that would make your job easier relative to studies that are out there or are being conducted, or the variables or factors that interest some of these surrounding communities, some more than others, to kind of start thinking about that activity and start thinking ways of sharing data or even just knowing what's going on. So
I think one offered to pony up some resources too. I heard them correctly.
We'll take resources.
I'll be reviewing the minutes for that part of it to make sure that we do follow up.
No, I think that's actually a great point, though, because, there is a lot of information that the applicants are collecting, and there's information that the communities are collecting as well. And it would certainly be a cost efficiency if we were to be able to access, the traffic reports, for example, would be a great source of data to be able to make available to people eventually.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up.
cost efficiency was exactly what I was thinking about.
But,
And you care
that's
about the
that's a connection John can help you make if you need to. But there shouldn't, I can't imagine that as time passes, there'll be any resistance on the applicant's part to share these reports. They're public reports, so that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Thanks.
That's it.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got a full agenda still.
Yeah. All right, what are we back to now? Back to the ombudsman?
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to bundle a couple of items.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, permission.
items B and D, they are included in Council Blue's memorandum to you, which I think she's going to present.
So at our last commission meeting, we were discussing the possibility of a variance from some of our regulations, and in particular, we were talking about the 30-day timeframe between when the surrounding communities are designated and when the hearing in the host community occurs. So if you go into your materials, we have a memorandum in there that talks about the specific sections of 23K and the specific sections of our regulations which impact that discussion. And then we've also included a timeline in terms of how you might approach scheduling the designations and then the holding of the host community hearings.
Is it fair to say that with either of the two options, granting a waiver or not, we end up in a similar date
Yes.
at the end of?
Yes, whether we do a waiver or whether we proceed as our regulations are currently drafted, we end up at about the same final award date. The difference comes in the middle where you have a hearing in the host community that you would start and then continue until such time as the surrounding community agreements were completed.
And this timeline anticipates communities utilizing and applicants utilizing the entire periods for arbitration and negotiation of their agreements.
If they did not go through arbitration or they went through a shorter period, then obviously that would tighten up the timeline. But the timeline shows the entire 60-day period, the 30 days for negotiation and the 30 days for arbitration.
In your opinion, what alternative would get closer to the concern of the surrounding community, having not enough time to negotiate, whether we're counting the arbitration or not?
I think the option of following the regulations as they're currently written gives them a continuous period of time. So they go in from negotiations into arbitration, so they're proceeding sort of in a continuous time frame. And then you would have the hearings in the host community after they were completed. So you could ask questions about the process, what they negotiated, where they were. But I think overall, they have the same amount of period of time to negotiate or to complete it. It's just that they have that hearing where they're going to come before you in the middle of that process.
And which one of the two alternatives would have the risk of ultimately extending our deadline past February 25th, in your opinion? If, say, something like an arbitration process was too little time envisioned by us.
Well, if the arbitration took longer, and I think that's something we've thought about all along in terms of our timelines, if it did take longer, it would extend the process out. If you look at the statute, you really can't take action being the award of a license, until all those agreements are completed. So, any time that period was extended, then that would run the risk of extending the ultimate award date. I don't think that any one of these two options necessarily runs a greater risk of extending that award date. It really is more about how long it takes for the arbitration or the negotiation periods to go forward.
But that 30-day arbitration period is entirely a creature of our regulations, and we would have, and I would hope we'd take the opportunity to check in on how the arbitration is proceeding as it goes along, to make sure that it's on track and to get the parties together and to, for example, if the arbitrator designation doesn't occur on time, we could get them in here and say,
What about it?
So,
Right.
a real consideration is they both come out at the same place, but a real consideration is the optics of starting the statutory hearings in situations where all the surrounding communities haven't been designated, and whether that contributes to the angst, for want of a better word, that is manifest legitimately among some of the surrounding communities that haven't been designated, or that have not. They'll all be designated by then, but that have not had a chance to go through the surrounding community process. My sense is we can explain it, but and be very careful to articulate the fact that we're starting this, to give them more information, to in a way assist them in making this ultimate surrounding community arrangement, these surrounding community arrangements. But there is I think, the potential for a concern that the train has left the station now and we're still on the platform.
Because we've started the statutory hearing without a designation.
Yeah, no, without they'll all be designated by then.
Oh, without an executed agreement.
Without an executed agreement. So we started it on what is by definition an incomplete application. Under the statute, you don't have a complete application inferentially until all the surrounding community agreements are filed, or executed and filed. So it could have the appearance of starting these statutory hearings on an incomplete application. Now, as I say, if we're careful, I think we can say that we're doing that really in an effort to make sure this process completes on time, because these agreements, these host community hearings may take more than a day. And that, starting them then would give us time to have two sessions, 3 sessions if necessary. And in the process, give the surrounding communities an opportunity to learn more about the project and learn more about the applicant's reaction to the project and learn more about the applicant's reaction to our questions than they'd otherwise have if we left the whole process to the end. So it would have that benefit, but we'd have to be careful to reinforce that we were not making any prejudgments, and we weren't going to make any judgments until we had a chance to have a hearing on their surrounding community agreements, as well as everything else.
If we did it, I mean, I think reinforcing that point, if we postponed the host community agreements, it would almost be as if it's after the fact. I mean, we will have done all the other evaluation and we'll sort of be just sitting twiddling our thumbs, and it makes the host community agreements, you know, I think appear to be just sort of in name only. So I think that I think it's, to the extent that you can figure out a public interest here, it seems to me that the public interest is served by doing it sooner, earlier in the process. As long as we make sure that, you know, everybody, you know, that we've anticipated, that everybody has a chance to speak, that it is making a non-trivial step towards getting more information out there, getting more participation earlier in the process before we've had any time to let our positions crystallize.
Yes, and I think that it also has the advantage of a more deeply participatory process, because we're taking this whole hearing process in a series of bites. So you have a chance to bite and chew and bite and chew, and maybe there's a better analogy. But you really do have a chance to digest information before we come to the final decision-making hearing. And I think one could characterize that as a benefit. It's just the question whether, given the level of anxiety that's understandably out there, we add to that by doing it this way.
Have you got any pushback one way or the other, or feedback one way or the other?
No, I think one potential aspect, after we make our decisions on surrounding community status, if indeed we choose a community and say that that community is not a surrounding community, one potential about the way that we did our notices, we sent out our notices to all those that have been designated, all those that have reached agreement or about to reach agreement, and then those who have just petitioned for surrounding community status. So in between the time that we sent our notice on October 1st and the date of the hearing, we will have made our determinations on surrounding community status. So if anything, you may get a complaint from a community, if indeed they are not designated as a surrounding community, saying, well, I received this notice ahead of time, even though it very carefully said in the body of the letter that this does not mean that you're a surrounding community.
Right.
That community might say, we want to have our say at that hearing.
Well, we might let them, yeah. All right. And so because we have decided to have applicant, host community, surrounding communities, I forget what else, but we have that.
Citizens.
And
Yeah.
citizens,
Yep.
yes.
Yeah. So if there's no problem, as long as we're not opening up a legal ground here for, you know, that theoretically you're not supposed to have the host community hearings until you have a complete if there's any legal ground that is giving somebody fodder to appeal our decision or our process or something, as long as that's not a problem, then I think it's better to have it sooner. I mean, I think it's in the public interest to have it sooner.
There's always the potential. I mean,
Yeah.
any time there's an ambiguity in the statute, there's a potential for litigation. But this, the legal team, and I participated in conversations with them, thought this through, and this looks like an entirely defensible and appropriate way to interpret the statute.
Right.
And to move forward. the statute says you cannot take action until that hearing's been held, until 30 days after that hearing's been held. And then, but then goes on to define what action is. The action it defines is approve, grant an application, reject an application, or defer that decision for up to 30 days. So those are the three categories of action. And
Okay.
so it seems to me that this not only fits the statute and is a sound interpretation of the statute, as the commission has the primary responsibility for doing, but also functionally related to maximizing the information that's out there, and the information that is available to us and to the communities
Right.
as we move forward. So it seems to me that this would be a good approach.
Do we need a vote or not?
There's two things that you need to do. You would need to grant a variance from the regulations, because you would be having the host community, hearings in the host community within about 12 to 14 days after you do the designations. The designations are scheduled for November 21st. So the first thing would be to grant a variance from the regulation. The second thing we started to discuss at our last meeting was that the regulation provides that some of these activities, when we extended the date to file your petition, were supposed to occur upon or before the RFA2 application, so we would want to grant a variance from that. We obviously will accept executed agreements, and we accepted petitions for an extended period of time after the RFA2 was filed. So we really need to grant two variances. And if, for the commission to grant a variance, there are 4 findings that the commission must make. They must find that it's consistent with the purposes of 23K, that granting the variance will not interfere with the commission's ability to fulfill its duties, that the granting of the variance will not adversely affect the public interest, and that not granting the variance will cause a substantial hardship. And I think we've discussed each of those topics, and I think I would be comfortable in granting a variance and making those findings.
Right. Okay. So, anybody, just, it seems like we've got a consensus here, is that?
Yep.
So, Commissioner McHugh, you want to set up a motion?
Let's take the variance from the 30 days in the regulation between the time of designation of the surrounding communities and the statutory hearing. And with respect to that 30-day period, I move that the commission declare that the 4 conditions for granting a variance have occurred, and that the commission grant a variance reducing the period of time between the designation of surrounding communities and the holding of the statutory hearing to
I believe it's between 12 and 14 days, between the 21st and then the last scheduled hearing in the host community is December the 5th.
to no less than 12 days.
Yes.
That's the motion.
Excellent. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously.
And the second variance that we need is from which section?
It's from the requirement that the petitions for surrounding community status
Yes.
be provided at or around the time of the RFA2 application. Our regulations tie it into the RFA2 application. We extended the time frame for an additional 21 days after that. So it's from the RFA2 requirement in that same surrounding community section.
All right. So I would move that the commission find that the 4 factors for a variance have been met, given the additional time that surrounding communities sought to make and arrange surrounding community status with applicants. And that we extend by 21 days the deadline for surrounding community, for conferring surrounding community status on a surrounding community by voluntary agreement between the applicant and the surrounding community, or by, what was the first one?
It was we allowed them to file their petition by October 31st, as opposed to 10 days after the RFA2, which have been roughly the 14th, I believe.
Right, but I thought there were two, well, all right, I'll just stop the motion right there. Let me restate it. That the commission find that the four factors required for a variance have been met with respect to the timeliness of a voluntary surrounding community designation between an applicant and a surrounding community, and that the time for the commission's acceptance of those voluntary designations be extended by 21 days. Does that do it?
I think that's correct, and then the second piece of that would be that we would accept surrounding community agreements that were voluntarily entered into after the deadline for filing the RFA2 application.
And that, well, that, all right, I'll make that clear, and I'll add to that, and that we accept the surrounding community designations between an applicant and a surrounding community that are filed no later than 21 days after the RFA2 deadline.
And this is category 2, correct?
Yes, these are just
What did I
category
say?
2.
These are just category 2.
What, did I say category 1?
I-
Category 2.
Didn't,
Category
Oh, I
two.
didn't.
didn't designate.
All right, category 2.
Yeah. I think what we'll do, because it's a very complicated section of the regs, we can put this into a motion for you at the next meeting that we can pass, that'll make it, I think,
Is
a
that
little bit-
timely? That'd be a lot better,
Yeah,
because
I think that
I
will be.
usually can wing it pretty good, but
This is, it's kind of technical, so we'll put it into a
it's 4
motion.
o'clock.
Yeah,
And I'd lost track of what he was talking about.
so we'll provide
That
that.
was because the
next-
moving party is
meeting.
lost track of.
Okay, so, but John, the thing that, to me, another big issue here is, first of all, this is all moot if they don't go into the arbitration process, right? Which is what we're hoping, because this would be horrible if we had to postpone the license a month and a half, from the 9th, which is our plan, to the 25th of February would be really unfortunate. But I guess we don't have any way to handicap that at this point? Does it look like that's going to?
I have daily conversations with the applicants and many of the communities, and I handicap it hourly sometimes. If you talked to me yesterday at this point, I would have been very convinced that we would have had a substantial number of them done by the end of this week or early part of next week. As of earlier this morning, I was hit with some pessimistic news, so I'm going the other way, but hopefully that'll turn around by tomorrow.
But
There've been
anyway, it is what it is, right?
daily meetings with these communities. And one thing I will note is that, and I think it's quite obvious, when communities make petitions for surrounding community status, there's no guarantee that they're going to be designated as a surrounding community. It is a petition that the commission will have to weigh very heavily, the arguments on both sides. And so we have a number of agreements that are hopefully being made by applicants and communities, and there is some risk for both applicants and communities if they don't reach those agreements. Applicants, they have the risk of going into an arbitration that they may experience an award that they weren't predicting. And for communities, either they could be not designated as a surrounding community and thereby left without any agreement, or go to an arbitration process where they receive something that is much less. So that's just a reminder out there that this process hopefully will reach results not through the adversarial process.
Yeah.
It's worth noting, though, Mr. Chairman, that although I share, and I think we all do, the thought that it would be too bad if this were pushed back to February 25th, that outside date has been a part of the schedule since we
Right, I agree.
discussed it last
Yeah.
February. Our hope had been and remains that we don't have to go out that far, but we built in that contingency and have had it in mind for a long time.
I agree, but we know that. I'm not sure the public does, and this might be an opportunity to just sort of remind people that January 9th is our deadline, but for this one set of factors, which is outside our control, and that we could slip to as late as the end of February if the communities can't get if the communities and the applicants
Right.
can't get their acts together.
Right. That's really beyond our control.
Yeah.
So I sort of finalized the presentation for today. My memo reflects the dates that Council Blue just talked about. What we anticipate is that we would have communities into the commission on next Thursday on the 14th. Any communities or applicants that want to provide further information to the commission regarding their petitions for surrounding community status. I've talked to a number of different communities. It's not quite clear that all of those communities will want to make further presentation before the commission. Some feel that they did a very substantial job in their written petitions. We'll, over the course of the next week, we'll find out which communities will want to participate in that hearing. And then we are hoping that we can get recommendations to the commission on the 21st for decision, and hopefully it's not the current number of 9 petitions, but it is something significantly less than that. But the process that we've identified for reviewing those applications is included in that memo, but it's a combination of internal resources, staff resources, Ombudsman's office, legal office, the problem gaming and research office, in tandem with our consultants. One thing I will note, obviously there's going to be sort of very heavy reliance upon the McFarland Group to do some of the traffic analysis, as that is the major component of most of these applications. But one of the subcomponents, one of the other topic areas is a housing-related matter. Many of these communities have raised concerns regarding impacts on housing and school-aged children, and that is something that we may need to review a little bit further. We have some pretty good advice from the regional planning agencies, but not in all of the areas. So we are exploring bringing on some additional expertise to the Pink & Co. crew to do that, and we're working out the contract logistics, which may require an amendment to their contract to bring on a sub-consultant at the same rates as Pink & Co., but that may require an amendment, but that's not up for consideration today, as it hasn't been noticed. One thing I will talk about further is that, so we have surrounding community petitions, and then we have one involuntary disbursements petition for a surrounding community. And that's a separate petition. Under our regs, it was really anticipated that the communities would make petitions for funding through the involuntary disbursements process before our application deadline. This one has come after our application deadline, but what we have talked about with the applicant and the community, Fitchburg, is that potentially they could come before the commission next Thursday, and we could take a look at that involuntary disbursement standard. Now, the standard for review for an involuntary disbursements petition under our regs is different from the review of surrounding community petitions. Surrounding community petitions standard of review involves a review of the applications, review of the traffic plan, review of the infrastructure plan, but the review of a involuntary disbursements petition is pursuant to 205 CMR 114.032B. The commission may take action on the application either upon administrative review of the filings, or it may convene a hearing on the application at which it may allow presentations from the community and the applicant. So I don't know if it was really anticipated that we do the full review for the involuntary disbursements petition the way that we will with a surrounding community petition. And the importance of that is that obviously there'll be additional resources that will be utilized for the surrounding community petitions during the full review. But this involuntary disbursements petition, potentially we could do it next week, but based on the filings and any additional information that they provide at that meeting. This is an unexplored area, obviously, because we anticipated that involuntary disbursements would occur before the application, but not after the application. But I think that approach is consistent with the regs.
It is consistent, yes.
So you're going to, between now and next Thursday, you're going to have utilized all those resources to make recommendations on?
No, no. So between now and the 21st,
Okay, so
we will.
There'll be presentations on the 14th.
But presentations on the 14th by communities and applicants.
So are you going to give us written recommendations that we'll be able then to think about?
We will give you written recommendations before the 21st.
Okay.
Hopefully by the 19th, on however many are outstanding. And potentially, if there's a possibility, but maybe we could give you some notes in advance of the 14th, if that's possible. I'm not quite certain that it is.
Okay. So any petitioning community or applicant that wants to can come in on the 14th
Yeah.
and make a presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Let's provide dinner.
and even though we only have one community that has made a request in its petition to come present to us, I think that there probably should be some consistency between the Category 2s and the Category 1s, and I think it is highly likely that the Category 1 surrounding communities will want to make presentations before the commission.
Right. Okay. I don't think we need a motion for that. I mean,
No.
I think that sounds
Just a
fine.
report.
Yeah, that's what we were looking for. Okay, great.
That's what I have.
All right, thank you, John. What's next? I guess Director Day, you can sort of pick your poison here. Do you want you or Rick or both, or how do you want it?
I think probably we should go with the regulations. If I understood correctly, with our process, we still hope, we're still planning on making sure, let me try it one more time. We're planning on awarding a license still January 10th.
Correct.
Unless we have
Right.
some problems. So I think with
yeah.
that, we need to be prepared to have our regulations in
Right.
place. So
Yeah.
I would like Todd and
David.
Todd and David to
And we're not going to be able to adjourn, if we're going to lose you we do have this one other new business item that wasn't anticipated at the time of the agenda. And I do want to have Commissioner McHugh here for that. So if we get to 4:30, I think we better stop and turn to that topic.
And Chairman, it's obviously up to you, but I don't see any particular problem if you want to move me all the way, my whole thing to next week, that's fine too.
Well, I think the budget update we really need to do. So we could, I'd be okay, application evaluation discussion. That was,
We do have some issues with the evaluation questions.
yeah, I think
For
we
one
need-
thing, but then we also have some questions about the evaluation teams and apparent conflicts and information.
well, I think we should try to do the budget and that. Maybe we could move the other two. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Commissioners, we're here once again to talk about the draft regulations, 205, 132 through 138. I just want to take a quick moment to thank Council Grossman for the work that he's done with respect to these regulations. This is not a simple task. This is quite complex, and I just wanted for the record to personally thank Mr. Grossman here for the work that he's done. And with that, I think you'll do the highlights, and since we're running into
Sure.
time.
The end game here would be, if the commission is comfortable, approving these regulations to move forward in the promulgation process, and if that is the case, we would be able to have these regulations in effect on January 3rd. So what you have before you
Go ahead.
or may not have before you.
It's all right. Got it all in my head.
Right, exactly. You have before you the full set of regulations, and I should just note that some of them are work in progress. We put in some things as placeholders that we'll need to develop over the course of the next few weeks, if you're comfortable with the concepts we're talking about. But given the hour here, I'll just kind of try to hit some of the highlights, and of course, over the course of the next few weeks, we can all continue to sit down and discuss what we have included in here, with an eye towards a public hearing on December 13th, if all goes to plan. So, after the conversation at your last meeting, we added a new section in. It's 134.11. It deals with the registration process, and what we decided to do was pull it out of the licensing, so there's a clear delineation between individuals who have to be licensed and individuals who have to be registered. And in an effort to draw a brighter line, as we've talked about, we thought it would be easier to have separate sections on the two. The statutes, in fact, deal with registrations differently. And the analogy that we've been using, just to kind of make it clear and make sure we're all on the same page, is that the registration process is designed largely to be akin to that of the registration process for motor vehicles. And that is that you tell the registry who owns the car and where it's going to be headquartered, and that's essentially the extent of it. They don't get into how much they like the car and stuff like that. So here, we've set out a process where people essentially are being just registered. And as distinguished from the licensing process, where there's more of a substantive review. So what I mean by that, we'll get into in a moment. But that was one of the key distinctions between this version and the last version. We have, on page 7, we added in some new language that deals with gaming vendor qualifiers. And essentially what we have done is set out standards that the Commission can use, and the Bureau and the Division of Licensing can use in identifying who the qualifiers to a gaming vendor will be. Because before, all we had was essentially the statutory language, which talks about a 5% shareholder of the common shares stock. Of course, vendors may not all be corporations or entities in which the stock is issued. So we've added in essentially the same language that is included in the regulations previous for the identification of qualifiers to the casino applicants. The reason, as you can see on the screen, for those of you who don't have a copy, that we've highlighted some of the language, I think the Commission needs to look at, and we need to talk about how in-depth you want to look at the individuals who would be deemed qualifiers. And here, for example, in the highlighted section, we talk about folks who may be lenders, underwriters, close associates, and such of a gaming entity. So the question is, are those the types of individuals or entities that we are interested in having qualified as an essential licensee to a gaming vendor? It's a policy question. I don't think there's any harm in leaving it in for the time being, unless you're prepared to talk about it now, although this might be a conversation you need more time to really think about and prepare for. But that's why it's highlighted there, so it's one thing to think about in the future, what the scope of a gaming vendor qualifier would be. Which takes us to page 9, and the waiver and exemption section. I just wanted to point out, and this was added at the last minute, we haven't had a chance to fully develop it, if you will, but we added it in as a placeholder, and there are indeed other jurisdictions that have more fully formed rules on this. But on the bottom, you'll see an exemption section, so that there are certain types of acts or activities that, if performed, would take you outside the realm of an entity that would have to be licensed as a vendor. For example, and I just threw these in really quickly. This is not an exhaustive list, and in fact, the descriptors would need to be fleshed out far more than they are here. But for example, an entity that provides insurance or 401k plans, that does advertising, other types of transactions, police details, things like that, where perhaps you would otherwise qualify under the definitions of what a vendor is, that we talk about whether you be exempt from having to be licensed for those certain types of activities.
Did you mean activities?
I did, in fact, yes. So it says they're entities, it should be activities. But I think kind of in the next draft you see, that section will be largely redone. That's just kind of a placeholder at the moment. The next number of pages, starting on page 10, well, let me back up. On page 10, we have a section for labor organizations. We need to talk about, not necessarily right this second, but at some point, whether this is how we want to handle the registration of labor organizations. This is a model that we culled together from a couple of other jurisdictions. There's a statute in the Massachusetts Act, it's Section 32 of Chapter 23K, I believe, that basically gives the Commission authority to ensure that labor organizations are registered. There's not a lot of meat on those bones, though, so the question is whether we have an interest in fleshing that out as we have here or not. It could be a pure registration where labor organizations merely have to give their name and some minimal information, as opposed to here where you have to provide the names of your officers, agents, principal employees, and the like. So that's something to keep in mind as we move through this process as well. After that, starting on page 10 and running through the next 10 or so 15 pages, ending on page 23, we have the form section. And there is one form here, basically for each type of license or registration that will be required. So this is a critical element here, and we need to make sure that we set out any key information that you're going to want to see. I think we need to take another look at some of the information we're requesting in the forms to ensure, just to pick up on the conversation from last week, that it's all meaningful information, that there are items that we plan on making use of as part of the investigation. It's not just busy work, if you will. And that we want to keep it as is, and conversely, that there's nothing we've left out. But this is where the heart of the forms and the licensing process is centered. So if we forward then over to page 23, we see at the bottom the submission of the application. So this section here just talks about basically what has to be submitted. And starting at the bottom of the page, you see section 1. It says the completed application, you have to submit a number of things for each license and registration. The first thing you have to submit is in section 1 a form, and we identify here in section 1 which form from the preceding section that you have to submit, and it depends on which license or registration you're seeking. So you would submit that specific form. You would then also have to submit a passport-style photograph. Proof, you would have to get fingerprinted and submit proof of your fingerprinting, identification documents, any applicable fee. And now we're back at the issue that we talked about once before, which is whether you will have to provide proof of an offer of employment from a gaming licensee pending your licensure or registration. So that's where that is. Again, I don't know if this is something you want to talk about now or later, but that obviously at some point we'll have to make a decision as to whether to keep that in there. Now, what we have done is, and by we, I think I did this, I don't know if we talked about it, so I'll take responsibility for this, is limited it to just the key gaming employees, the gaming employees, and the gaming service employees. So the way it's drafted, the vendors wouldn't have to demonstrate any proof of employment or anything like that.
You know, that's one where I'd love to hear different arguments from the industry too. I don't feel like I really have thought that through or know exactly how to think that through. So, I mean, you've had experience with it, so I guess you know how the industry would react, but it might be something that we could get feedback from applicants on.
And I suspect we will when we post these for public comments.
Right.
Yeah, and I have that feeling with respect to a lot of what's in here. This is one particular area.
This is one.
Yeah. Okay.
And speaking of which, we're getting into kind of the meat and potatoes here, and this is where I think we'll get a lot of comments from all over. The next section, which deals with the process. So that's page 25, 134.09. It talks about how the applications essentially will be processed, your rights of appeal, things of that nature. And we'll get to this in a moment, but I would just flag for you that in the following two sections, sections 10 and 11, we talk about the affirmative standards of licensure, and that gets to the discussion that we had last week about how in-depth you want to see the investigations and things like that. But for purposes of this section, 09, we're just talking about the process itself. And we broke it up by the different types of licensure and registration, as you'll see. So it goes 1 through 5. It's broken down into the keys and the gaming employees, the gaming service employees, the vendors and the vendor qualifiers, the non-gaming vendors, and the labor organizations. There are a lot of similarities in the process between the keys and the gaming employees and the gaming vendors. Those are all kind of dealt with one way, and then the registrations are dealt with slightly differently. And it all comes back to the nature of the investigation and the standard of proof. So one of the ways that we were able to differentiate the registration from the licensure is, in fact, the standard of proof that's required. The statute talks about applicants for the licenses having to demonstrate their suitability by clear and convincing evidence. It's very similar to the RFA-1 process. Such language does not exist, to the best of my reading, when it comes to registrations. And I think that was done for the reasons that you discussed last week, which was that the legislature didn't intend to hold the registrants to that same burden. So what we've done, and we'll get to that in a moment, to account for that is said that the registrations will be presumptively issued. The applicants don't have to initially meet any burden of proof for the issuance of the registration. Whereas, in contrast, and this is what we talk about here, in order to be issued a license, you have to meet your burden of proof, you go through the investigation, and then your license is issued. So it's handled in a different way. There's no presumption that you'll be issued a license. You first have to go through the background check to get the licenses. So just some of the highlights here real quick are when it comes to keys. As you'll recall, we set out two different types. We've broken down the key gaming employees into two categories. And we've talked about renaming one of them because a number of people have voiced some level of concern over the title. But the way it presently reads is that we have key qualifiers and keys. So the term key will probably be modified with some other term one way or another to set it out. But the key qualifiers are the individuals at the very upper end of the casino, the principals, folks of that nature. And the way the system is presently set up, if the Bureau or Division of Licensing were to determine that that individual has what we'll call a clean application, that nothing has come up in the background check, the person is suitable, then they could make a recommendation of approval of the license. For the key qualifiers, they would then have to forward that recommendation along with the application to the commission. And only the commission could then issue a key qualifier license. So those are the very upper level licenses. As opposed to the keys and the gaming employee licenses, where if the bureau or the division were to find that an applicant has met their burden of proof and demonstrated their suitability, that the commission would allow for the division or bureau to issue those licenses on their own without commission review. So that's one of the key distinctions between the key qualifiers and the keys and gaming employees. That's what this says presently. All of this, of course, is subject to modification. But that's how this was designed. The vendors, the gaming vendors, were designed in a similar way. So the gaming vendors would have to go through a similar process to the key qualifiers. And that is that if the division or the bureau were to find that the applicant had met its burden of proof, of demonstrating its suitability, it would recommend approval of the license. It would then forward that approval, the recommended approval along with the application to the commission, and then only the commission could issue a gaming vendor license. I think we did the same thing with the gaming vendor qualifiers. I think they also fall into that category, that only the commission could sign off on that. As opposed to the gaming employees and all the registrations, which the division and the bureau would have authority to issue on their own without commission review. So that's if everything comes out and people have, or entities have met their burden of proof. If entities have not met their burden of proof, there are, it's a very similar process we've set up for everyone. And this, again, is all kind of born out of what the statute says. This is section 30 and 31, which talk about licensing of employees and vendors respectively. And essentially what the regulations say are that if the Bureau finds that an applicant for a key gaming license or a gaming employee license or a gaming vendor license have not met their burden of proof, they will deny the application in writing to the individual or entity. Now, this is without any hearing or anything like that. If something's come up in the background check, whether it's a criminal conviction or some other issue, which we can get to in a second. They'll deny it in writing. They'll advise the individual or entity the basis for the decision and advise that the individual has a right of appeal. And by statute, that right of appeal is to the Bureau. So we'll have to discuss, but the way it's presently set up, the Bureau would appoint a hearing officer who would then adjudicate these appeals that would come in. At that point, the hearing officer could affirm the decision, in which case the hearing officer would issue a decision to the applicant telling them that still the application is denied and advising them at that point that they have a right of appeal to the commission. So everyone can take the appeal all the way up to the commission. The way this is set up, and it's based on what the statute says, it would be essentially an administrative appeal on the record. So you would not be sitting at a public meeting and have witnesses coming in and testifying on these licenses. It would be a review of the record to determine essentially whether the decision was arbitrary and capricious, things of that nature. And we wrote that in, that's on page 27. Everything I'm talking about is basically on pages 25, 26, and 27. And essentially what we have done for purposes of the commission adjudication of the final appeals, if you will, is look to Chapter 30A, I think it's Section 14, which talks about how courts adjudicate 30A appeals. And we pulled out some of those reasonings, and we said that essentially the commission will just look to whether a decision was made in excess of authority based on an error of law, whether it's arbitrary and capricious, unsupported by the evidence, things like that. So if you were to find the hearing officer was mistaken or made a mistake, an error, you could then overturn that decision. So that would be for denials on the papers, by the Bureau, and then by the hearing officer. If the hearing officer were to conduct a appeal hearing and decide that the person's license should be issued, then the Bureau, again, would have the authority to issue the license for gaming employees and for key employees. But key qualifiers, again, and gaming vendors, they could only make the recommendation that the commission issue the license.
Todd, excuse me, we've got about 5 minutes before 4:30. Are you going to be more than that?
I think that perhaps, I would say that you might, well, only because we're going to get to kind of the registration situation. That might
Well,
take a few more minutes.
I want to talk about the other, the unanticipated issue.
Sure.
And that's important, so maybe we should stop for a minute and bring that up. Catherine, do you want to lead us on this?
So late in the day yesterday, we received a petition from the town of Hopkinton to intervene in the Crossroads suitability proceeding. That proceeding is scheduled for next Wednesday, November the 13th. If the commission would like, I can go a little bit through the standards for the decision and what you need to consider, but we thought it was appropriate that since that hearing was so close, that we take this up at this commission meeting. So pursuant to the Commission's regulations, we've adopted the regulations found in 801 CMR 1.00. Those are the rules for formal hearings in an adjudicatory process. Under those rules, any party not initially a party to a proceeding who may be substantially and specifically affected and wishes to intervene shall file a petition with the presiding officer to ask for their permission to intervene. In the case of the commission, because the commission hears all suitability proceedings as a commission of the whole, the presiding officer in that case is the entire commission. So it would be up to a vote of the commission to determine whether to allow this petition to intervene. Under the commission's regulations, only the aggrieved applicant has automatic standing. So there are no other individuals or parties that have standing in a suitability proceeding unless the commission, in its discretion, determines to grant the right to intervene. The consideration that the commission needs to think about is whether, in fact, the town of Hopkinton is specifically and substantially affected by the suitability determination. And I would suggest to the commission that a suitability determination is solely for the purpose of determining whether an applicant is suitable and may proceed to file an RFA2 application. This determination does not specifically or substantially affect any particular surrounding community. It does, of course, affect the applicant. The reasons... Good.
It does have, it has an effect, it clearly has an effect on a surrounding community, because if the permission is denied, there's no, if the suitability is denied, there's no impact on the surrounding community, and if it isn't denied, there is an impact on that surrounding community.
Well, the impact to the surrounding community, if the applicant is found suitable, isn't any different than it would be under the regulations and under the statute. All surrounding communities have the opportunity, and you could say the obligation, to negotiate some sort of an agreement with the applicant. And if they fail to be able to do that, then there's a process set up by the commission to go through arbitration. So the process is the same. There is, yes, if the applicant's not suitable, then the process ends. So the surrounding community then has no further activity. But assuming that an applicant is suitable, all surrounding communities are faced with the same type of impact in terms of they have to negotiate some sort of an agreement.
Right.
And I would argue that perhaps you already did. Surrounding communities are affected by a casino coming to, to their neighborhoods, not by the determination of suitability of applicants.
That's true.
That really affects the applicants,
Yep.
which is your point.
I think that's correct.
And it's true, is it not, that under our regulation, the substantial impact criterion is what triggers the commission's discretion. It does not mandate that a community that's substantially impacted be given party status, be given permission to intervene.
No, that's correct. It is in the sole discretion of the commission to make the determination.
Right.
Substantial and specific impact is one of the things that can be considered, but that doesn't necessarily require
Right,
that they be given permission to intervene.
right.
Does the letter, I got the letter last night, but I hadn't read it yet. Does the letter offer any reasons, any substantive reason that they have something to contribute that can't be contributed in the letter or in some other venue? Is there any policy reason why we should do this presented?
No, in the petition itself, it describes the impact as being the necessity to negotiate a surrounding community agreement. That's what they say is their substantial and specific impact. But in this particular case, there really isn't anything that can't be given to the commission either through written comments, which we have asked for, or through a meeting with the IEB, which this particular petitioner has had regarding comments on this application. And we'll be able to provide comments in the future at both surrounding community meetings and the meeting in the host community. So there are other points in the process where this particular petitioner can provide comments, and those opportunities have existed and will continue to exist in the future.
That, for me, is the key question. Is this petitioner in a position to offer a perspective, input, information that can't be obtained from anybody else? The qualification issue is one that is committed to the IEB. The IEB has, in each case, and I think our prior hearings demonstrate that in each case, has been carried out intensively, intrusively, thoroughly, and has surfaced issues that have been put before the commission for the commission's decision. We have not had in the past, I think, an issue that was not raised by the IEB that ultimately bore on our decisions. In addition to that, as you rightly point out, anybody in the public has the right to bring to the attention of the IEB and directly to us particular pieces of information that they have that they think bears on the suitability issue. And in fact, this applicant has already done so through letters and other kinds of things that I think has already done so. And so it seems to me that there is little new, there is nothing new, let me make it more definitive, that this petitioner can add to the presentations that we will have next week. And if it feels that something has been omitted, they still have the right, before we make our decision, to let us know. And it seems to me further that one of the things we have to be very careful to do in this suitability determination is keep the focus on the facts, not on ideas about gambling, not on ideals about ideas and opinions about the utility of a casino in a given location, not about the benefits and detriments of casino gambling or this casino. We've been rigorous about that, and we've been focused about that, and we've kept our eye on the ball, as has the IEB. And I think we need to keep our eye on the ball and keep that focus narrowly on the qualifications to proceed. And I don't think that allowing this applicant to participate would help us do that. And in general, it seems to me that the kind of focus that understandably, many surrounding communities or potential surrounding communities have is much better brought to bear on the RFA2 process when we're considering all of those issues, but not the narrow factual issue of qualification. So I would, period.
I would just like to add one other piece of information, which is we did ask for comments on this specific applicant, and the deadline that we put for those comments is November 12th, which is next Tuesday, there is still time for this petitioner to submit comments for that particular suitability proceeding, but also recognize that if they came in after the fact, we would certainly review them and we would circulate them to the commission, so.
Which we've said repeatedly, the suitability is a snapshot in time. It's always subject to review. Did you by any chance have an opportunity to ask Director Wells whether she thought there was any reason why their discussion with this community didn't do the job? Does she think there's any reason why they need to come before us?
I didn't ask her specifically about this petition, but I did ask her about the meeting she had with this applicant, and she did assure me that she was very forthright and forthcoming with them about whenever they had comments, she would accept them. She asked them for the comments at that time and told them she would accept them at any time in the future. And she has not received anything in addition to what she has already gotten through in her investigation.
Do we need a motion to deny this petition interview?
Yes. Yes, a motion and a vote.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that the commission deny the petition to intervene as offered by the representatives from the town of Hopkins.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will you respond to that, Catherine, or do I?
Yes, no, I will. I will.
Came to you, okay.
Yes, I'll send a response to their attorney.
Okay, thank you. Okay, gentlemen, back to you. With an eye to the clock.
Right. Okay. So, when we last left off, we were talking about the appeal process. We can move on from that. And the only thing I would note at this point, I'm on the bottom of page 26 now, where I make reference there to the informal fair hearings rules for the hearings. And the way it's written here, it would pertain to all of these hearings, and the existing language of the regulations that have already been promulgated make reference to some of these being conducted under the formal fair hearings rules. So I circulated for you, for your review last evening, a separate document that proposes amendments to the existing regulations. And we, again, don't have to make this decision right this moment, but I just wanted to include this as part of the presentation so we could get it moving through the process, where we would essentially delete the references to making these hearings conducted under the formal rules.
Wait a minute, I don't understand that. Is that the amendments to 205 CMR 101 and 112?
Yes.
Why are we striking the hearings before the Bureau and special proceedings for hearings before?
The hearings before the Bureau talk about the four kind of hearings that we talk about here on page 25 through 27. And all that really does is it says that the hearings shall be, some of them should be conducted under the formal rules, some of them should be conducted under the informal rules.
Right.
I would suggest that it is better practice to conduct these types of hearings under the informal rules. So for that purpose, I recommend that we delete the reference to the formal rules. And as far as deleting the whole thing is concerned, I think it's better placed here along with the process as opposed to having it in a separate section where we talk about how the hearings would be conducted.
But in the earlier section, it applies to any hearing before the commission can take one of these forms, right?
Well, there are two other sections, 01 and 03, which I didn't include here, which talk about hearings before the commission, which are different. For example, the RFA 1 hearings you're presently conducting are conducted under the formal rules.
Right.
We're not touching that.
But aren't there other hearings before the Bureau other than licensing hearings?
These are the only ones that are talked about in the regulations. There could feasibly be other hearings, I suppose.
Talked about in the regulations. There's no other statutory hearings before the Bureau.
There will be some that we talk about at the end of these regs, disciplinary type hearings.
Right.
But those aren't referenced in 101.
I guess my only point is that this section's a licensing section.
Right.
And if we're going to have hearings before the Bureau for other than licensing purposes, and I think we are, then doesn't it make sense to have the hearing section in a section that has hearing regulations generally? I throw that out.
It would, and we should definitely look at this. So this was just kind of, again, I put it out here because if we don't move an amendment to this section through the process, we may have procedural problems coming back and trying to amend this section. So we're flagging the issue now. We can always, by the time we get to the public hearing, not do this.
All right.
Okay,
that's enough. The hour's late. I just want to flag that because I'd like to give that a second thought.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's essentially the hearing process. And again, we can all sit down and talk about this on a individual basis, just so you're all clear as to what the regulations say. The draft regulations, I should say. So sections 10 and 11 talk about the affirmative standards, and these, by and large, come right out of the statutes. They reflect sections 12 and 16 of Chapter 23K. Section 12 talks about the suitability standards, the reputation. 16 talks about the criminal offenses. So as far as the licensing side of things, we basically, we do say, not basically, that the Bureau shall evaluate and consider all of the following things: the integrity, honesty, good character, financial stability, things along those lines that the statute makes reference to. We've added in a few other things, and one in particular I'd like to draw your attention to, that's not referenced in the statute, but otherwise it's not captured. So it's something that we need to think about. And that is, so we're on page 28 here, it's B6, and there's a similar provision in the next section. It talks about looking at whether the applicant has been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude. So when we look at someone's criminal record, all the statute talks about are disqualifiers for felony convictions and then crimes related to perjury, theft, and fraud type issues. Doesn't include anything else. So the question becomes whether you want to limit the review to just those issues or to everything else. So by including this moral turpitude provision in here, it would allow you to look at that. We would obviously have to be clear on what crimes of moral turpitude are. We have a chart that we can look at. There are a number of ways to go about doing that. But this is, I just wanted to note, that's not in the statute. That was something that was added in. I think there are a number of other jurisdictions that have similar language in there.
What is moral turpitude?
Well, it's obviously a one of those things that is probably somewhat difficult to define, the term.
But you know it when you see it.
But you know it when you see it. What I've done in the past and been a part of is taking a list of every crime there is in the Commonwealth and actually identifying which crimes are crimes of moral turpitude. So you know very directly, if you've been convicted of this, this is a crime of moral turpitude. So it's not a matter of looking at a record and trying to figure out whether it is or it isn't. So there are ways to deal with it, but this is one way to make sure that we have some way to look at convictions that appear on someone's record and take action if we want. Without it, you'd have to perhaps bootstrap it in some other way. So this is just a more distinct way to do that.
Okay.
And moral turpitude is included for registrants?
It is, and why don't we kind of move over there and I'll show you kind of the distinction as to how these two sections work. And then there are a couple of other things too, but one of the distinctions we were able to draw between licenses and registrations was in the review of these types of things. And basically, where in the licensing section it says that the Bureau and the division shall consider those things, we wrote in to the registration section that, this is on the bottom of page 29C, that the Bureau may consider these things. So if it were to do a review after the issuance of the registration and something comes up, it has a way to take action. And in fact, that is consistent with section 16 of the statute, which allows the commission to take action for these types of issues. But at the same time recognizes the distinction between a license and a registration. So it's the shall versus the may. We also factor in the presumptive issuance versus meeting your burden. So there are all these different ways that we're trying to delineate between the license and the registration. The other area that I would just draw your attention to are the criminal offense reviews. And the statute is clear. Again, this is section 16 when it comes to the delineated crimes. That if you are an applicant for a key gaming employee license and you've been convicted of those crimes, it's an automatic disqualifier. At least this is my read of the statute, but this is something that we should obviously take a look at. So the regulations reflect that essentially if the Bureau denies your license application on the basis that you have been convicted of one of these disqualifying crimes, you have no right of appeal to anybody from that. I mean, I suppose you could argue that it wasn't you, but aside from that, you can't argue rehabilitation. That's the point. Whereas, if you have been convicted of one of those crimes, there are certain circumstances under which you may be able to argue rehabilitation, and that's something else that needs to be talked about. The plain reading of section 16 is that you can only argue rehabilitation for one of those crimes, the felony, the perjury, and theft, if the conviction was greater than 10 years prior to the date of submission of the application. That's my reading of the statute. There is a, I don't want to necessarily call it conflicting provision, but if you look at section 30, it talks about the fact that it's in the commission's discretion as to whether to allow the issuance of a license based upon rehabilitation, and it doesn't include that 10-year language. So whether that was intentional or not is hard to say, but it's something that we need to look at closely. The way the regulations are presently written, though, it includes the 10-year period. So if you have been convicted of one of those crimes, you can only demonstrate rehabilitation if it was greater than 10 years ago. Whereas for crimes of moral turpitude, we built in that you can demonstrate rehabilitation at any time. One of the, moving on to page 31, we talk about temporary licenses. And this will be as I now understand, a key provision. This applies to gaming employees and to key gaming employees. And based upon the amount of time it will take to conduct a background investigation, it will become important, my understanding is, and David can address this issue probably a little better than I, but many, if not all, applicants will at some period of point need a temporary license so they can begin working while we're conducting the background check. The statute talks about some of the areas that have to be included in the review. The one thing it does not include is the section C, which is in red there, and as you can see, it's not really well defined. It was just added in at the end, is what the standard will be that the commission will look at to determine whether to issue a temporary license. Whether it's presumptive, whether it's a reasonable likelihood of success type standard or something along those lines. I haven't had a chance to look at other jurisdictions to see how that's done, but I think that will be a key. One of the other issues, and the reason this is highlighted in yellow, is that the statute talks about the petition coming to the commission. So if there's a great volume of these, some consideration should be paid to whether that type of delegation is made to the Bureau and the division as well, or whether you want to see all of these temporary license petitions come in. We talk about, on page 32, we talk about the fees. Would you like to talk about the fees?
With respect to the fees, keys will be charged $1,000 and they will be subject to any additional billings based on the hours required to complete the investigation if they exceed $1,000. The average fees in other states for keys run about $2,500. I don't expect that figure to really change significantly here. The amount of time that it will require to complete a key background investigation, based on my experience, will suggest that the average cost will be in the $2,500 range. The $1,000 represents an initial deposit towards the final cost being determined by the number of hours required to complete that background investigation. Gaming licenses will be $300 for 3 years. That is comparable to other states. It's actually less than some states. It probably falls in the middle or lower middle. Gaming service employee registration is $75. We're looking $75 every 5 years. I think it's pretty reasonable that a person incurs. At a minimum of $75 would cover some of the basic costs of the fingerprinting and some of the basic background investigation. Gaming vendors, there will be an initial deposit of $10,000, and again, similar to the keys, they will be subject to any additional costs based on an hourly rate to complete a background investigation. Gaming vendors, in particular the bigger companies, background investigations will probably be in the $20,000 range. In the prior state that I worked on, the application, when it was all said and done, was at a minimum $25,000, and it did not include the cost for its qualifiers. That was an additional $2,500 per qualifier. So a gaming company could very easily be paying between $30,000 to $40,000 when it was all said and done. In this particular case, we're looking at $10,000. One thing that should be noted, with the non-gaming vendors, we're asking for $100 registration. The statute is clear that if you do a certain level of business, that you would then qualify or be classified as a gaming vendor. So you will be looking at a number of non-gaming vendors that will be subject to the fees and conditions of a gaming vendor, and that will be the $10,000 initial deposit and subject to the additional costs. Labor registration is $200. The other cost there is to replace the actual credential, which is $10. Late fees is a model that we're looking at with respect to renewal applications. We're looking at other states, how they practice that. We haven't come up with what a reasonable fee is and what kind of scheme. So that, while it's notated there, there is no value associated with it.
And part and parcel of that is the terms of licenses. We essentially, they're all at the 3-year level that the commission discussed previously, with one exception. That's the gaming service employees. That was adjusted to 5 years to give those folks a little extra time. I mean, this is all again subject to further consideration, but that's what's contained in the draft. There's nothing else in here that's tremendously exciting.
I have a general question, or a high-level question. All the scrutiny that goes into the gaming vendors, as it's here laid out, all the partners and all the officers, and which would appear to me that is the same from many other jurisdictions. as well as the fees, when you put them all together per company, per qualifier, doesn't that really result in a consolidation of this industry? These vendors are becoming essentially just very few, because they have to be licensed in multiple jurisdictions, and they're the only ones that can afford to go through the scrutiny and the cost. Is that a fair statement?
No, I think it is a fair statement, but right now, there's only a few out there. I think for us to make a decision, because there's only a few there, I'm not sure how you could work it any differently. Because there's only but so many people making slot machines. There's only but so many people making these types of gaming equipment that would, come to this agency to apply for that type of license.
Yeah, and it's a rhetorical question, or a sort of, if you pardon the hour, this late of the hour, but I guess I'm wondering what's the real end purpose. You mentioned the word busy work, and I appreciate that. Are we doing anything close to that when we're thinking about the level of scrutiny that we're going to do on a few companies that are out there because they're the only ones capable to do this? Both go through the scrutiny and pay the fees that are required. I know this is not a regulation question. I
can just make one note for everybody. There is a provision in here which is based on a provision of the statute that deals with reciprocity for vendors, and that's something we should also look at and make sure we have a process in place that would allow the commission to accept a vendor license from another state here, and what type of scrutiny you'd want to pay to someone like that. So perhaps you don't go through the full background check again, assuming, there are standards in here that we can take a look at, but I assume it is in account of your very question.
Yeah, but I don't understand if reciprocity will encourage new business or to expand the business pool, and I don't know if it's fair for Massachusetts to just simply charge a company $10,000, the next state over will charge $25,000, just because we established some kind of system that allows for the $10,000 to be the amount that's charged for this company.
I'm not interested in the delta between what we may be charging and others are. I'm more just really wondering as to the ultimate purpose. If in the end there's only a few companies that get to be licensed because they're the only ones that can, first conduct business in the gaming world, and then secondly be able to withstand the scrutiny and pay the fees, and
I don't understand what
well, are regulations like these times every other jurisdiction resulting in very few companies vendors being able to be licensed, which then, in my view, what's the purpose of going through this investigation yet one more time if they've already been through?
But why isn't the reciprocity issue do it? Whether we're having an influence on the industry or not, I don't know, and I don't know if it makes any difference. But the reciprocity would, if 10 other jurisdictions have done this very recently, I would argue it's pretty silly for us to do it all over again, particularly if some of those jurisdictions are jurisdictions whose systems we know and have trust in and have confidence in. We ought to have pretty close working reciprocity agreements. I agree with you. It's kind of silly to have everybody doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and somebody having to pay for it each time. I had a question. The multi-jurisdictional personal history form was for key qualifiers and vendor qualifiers. Oh, vendor qualifiers. But the vendors themselves, do they use the same business background form that we've used for licensees, for applicants?
It's a condensed version of that, but it's similar.
Okay, I didn't see a reference to that, but I can't help commenting that I can't imagine how we could do the vendor qualifications
At 25,000?
for 25,000, and for a company, it's $1.5 million. It's not like 10 times 25,000, it's like 100 times. It just doesn't make sense. How can you do a reasonable background somewhat similar to what we've been doing and do it for $25,000? Or how the hell are we spending $1.5 million to do it on the other ones? I don't get that. I mean, it's such a huge discrepancy, it's almost worth looking into, I think. I mean, I don't understand it's massive disconnect in the numbers.
I don't think it's the same background investigation. It's not the level of personal interviews, the level of follow-up then on everyone else they do business with. It's not, I don't believe it's the same investigation. You're strictly looking at that company and those qualifiers. It's not the same investigation.
Well, it's clearly not the same investigation, but the order of magnitude is so enormous. You know, the least expensive, simplest background is what, 600,000, something like that?
Yeah, our average was more like 750,000, but
Averages.
they've gone up recently, which I
Yeah.
was
So
going
anyway,
to talk about.
just-
So much more complicated, all of the financial partners, there's so much more to it.
Yeah, some of them, but like Cordish was, anyway, just strikes me as really, okay. Anything else?
If there are no further questions, then, again, I would reiterate that we could shoot for a public hearing on these regulations on December 13th. We can start to send out the notices to the Local Government Advisory Council, and then to the Secretary of State, start the notifications in the newspapers, and get it into the Mass Register. That would be the plan. And with your vote, we would move this and the other draft, so the two drafts, through the process.
Today?
So-
Are you looking-
If you do it today, if you want to do it today, then we can keep that schedule, get a public hearing
Yeah.
on December 13th. They would, barring any unforeseen circumstances, be in effect on January 3rd. If you wanted to take a time to digest these further, it would just bump the process out 2 weeks.
Which is cutting it awful close then.
Yeah, you're still allowing flexibility for additional comment. We've
Yeah.
talked about
Well,
the
people
stakeholder
can comment.
groups to weigh in.
I'm sorry, that's a great point. We can post these immediately for public comment. So
Right,
that would give
and
people.
we can still meet with you on
Right.
our own.
Oh,
and
sure.
make comment too, so I would say we ought to go ahead and move whatever it is you want us to move.
Absolutely, thank you. So it would be the
So
two
moved.
drafts. It would be it's the draft of,
Commissioner McHugh?
So I would move that the draft of the licensing regulations and the draft amendment to the hearing regulations be placed in line for promulgation through a notification of the Local Government Advisory Committee and such other steps as council may deem appropriate to have them ultimately, to have the public hearing and have the regulations ultimately adopted.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously. Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
All right, sadly, I have got to
All right,
depart.
see you later, thank you. We'll do a couple more quick things and then be right behind you.
We assume the late fee will be as much, if not more, than a return check.
That's a good question. I thought you were gonna say the late fee for what we get paid for this meeting. Okay.
Jared, did you want us to move through the budget items and just hold off on the schedule question?
The application evaluation discussion and the budget, those two.
Oh, you want to do the application
Yeah, I think we need
evaluations?
to do that, yeah.
Commissioner McHugh is leaving, and he is one of the individuals that has a big question on the evaluation. But I'll hit it when we get there.
All right.
Let me just start out real quick. Our first item, I have one item under my general update. At our last meeting, we presented a proposal to obtain licensing and document content system. The commission approved our recommendation but directed staff to return to the commission with further detail regarding the number of licenses to be purchased and related financial details. You'll find a memorandum under tab 6A from our CIO, John Glennon, and he will briefly summarize it real quickly. John.
Thank you very much. So I handed out an addendum with corrections this morning, first thing. So that replaces the what's in the package, and we'll update the public package. Essentially, what we did was to do the validation and due diligence with Director Wells and Director Costa and HR in terms of creating a model of the number of users that we would need for the licensing system. That's what you see here. Essentially, it's a projection of staff out 4 years, and that's the basis for the costing recommendations and the two options. So I'll entertain any questions on the staffing model.
How did they set the number for the external administrative users?
So 5 HR persons, 5 locations, I think was what we used for the swag. For a total of 25.
Okay. John, could you just hit the two options real quick?
Sure. So in the costs, so we took the numbers, worked with the vendor, and there are two options: is an upfront purchase of the licenses, which is option 1, and then there's purchasing kind of buy as you go over the period of the time. The difference between purchasing them all up front and doing it over time, I think there's a cost to that, both in terms of the maintenance and the cost of individual licenses. The vendor makes it, incentivizes us to buy the licenses up front. So I articulated in here the difference in those costs and the incremental cost of maintenance, through year 4 and outward. I think, again, the challenges the Commission has with the transitional budget is going to make a decision whether you go with option 1 or option 2. I would recommend purchasing them all. The difference is $60,000 between the two year 1 expenditures, and if you go out to the out years, by the end of year 4, you would have spent $240,000 plus $40,000 a year more on a go-forward basis on maintenance. So, but that's the summary.
Year 1 would mean this fiscal year?
Yes.
I thank you for clarifying from last week the two options. I am still, and I know this is not your number, but I am still a little hung up on what has become, in my view, a given in terms of the number of employees that this organization will have. Somebody came up with a number in the strategic plan a little while ago, 150, and that has become a given. And that is something that I still would like to understand a little better in terms of functions and headcounts and org chart, and I know you've taken steps to do that, but I think that's a significant cost driver that is now showing up for the first time here, and and we need to make decisions soon. But I am still not convinced that that we need. But I just wanted to mention that that's something that I like to understand in the next few days. The first org charts that I saw included a lot of assistants, a lot of great names, great sounding names, and since then we've made some progress in terms of understanding what we will need and when we need that, and I'd like to just continue that understanding.
Where did you come up with the 150? You didn't just take it out of the strategic plan, did you, or did you?
I didn't back into the 150 number. What we did was we counted the number of staff in each area on page 1 that the directors thought that they were going to need, the largest number being Director Wells' investigation unit because of the need to staff the facility 7 by 24 with multiple troopers and the investigation unit. So this was, we didn't build it up to 150. This was really done, kind of ground up by each functional area. I'm sure you
Well,
could
that's
go.
a detail that I'd like to see at some point.
Okay, I mean, that's important. If it just fell out of the strategic plan a year and a half ago, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But if you've done a zero-based analysis now with directors in place, we're beginning to know something about what they're doing, that would be more useful. So if you could share that, would be great. But this is the numbers, right? And so you could talk to the directors individually as to where they came from. This is the department by department analysis of where the numbers come from.
Well, and that adds up
With
to
the external
123.
Well, plus the
Yeah.
casino
Plus the
25
external
for,
folks.
on sites, I guess that is, right? That's on site,
That's for the casinos,
yeah, in the slot.
casinos.
So
yeah.
it sounds like there is some rationale there, but to the extent that you want to go over it, you could either check with the individual directors who came up with these numbers or with John.
Thank you very much.
I will do that.
If you, I mean, to me, the key thing is the year one numbers. I mean, the reason, part of the reason, we're having this discussion for two reasons. One is it's prudent to have discussions like this, and two is we're tracking our ongoing budget needs, which is part of the next discussion. But on the second issue, the fact that there's the difference between year one in the two scenarios, year one being the sort of critical variable year for us, most critical, is relatively slight. That seems pretty straightforward to me.
Right. I mean, at a first look, 17 employees for racing strike me as high, given recent developments.
Well, she ought to know pretty careful. I mean, she ought to know more than the rest of us, so. Oh, 17 for racing, were you getting that? Oh, I see, yeah, right, yeah.
Well, now that I know that I'm on the same boat with the question here, these were numbers that were supplied by the directors individually to John. So they are estimates. They aren't based on our organizational chart or projections at this point.
Okay, no, I stand corrected. I still would like to understand a little bit more some of the assumptions here. I understand there's dual or triple shifts in investigations, but I still think that there's a lot of numbers here.
And why would racing be adding 7 in the 3 years out? But, I mean, she came up with them. So we'll double check these, but let's assume they're order of magnitude. They gotta be somewhere pretty close.
Right, and I'm assuming, part of what the issue is we have to take what we have at this point and look forward. I mean, at this point, we're still assuming we have a valid racing shop,
Right.
and that hasn't changed, so I think that's what we're trying to do.
But even on the face of it, even that one number does jump out at me. Why would the racing, we're assuming that the racing doesn't change, that we're gonna have harness racing and thoroughbred racing on an ongoing basis. That's the assumption here. We have to assume that. Why would we be adding 7 people in year 3? Why would we be going
The only
from 10
thing
people to
I know
17?
the legislation calls for additional racing days under this new, if you're granted a license, it goes from 100 to 120 to, so I'm just not sure if that's
Well,
part of the scenario, additional racing days that are mandated with the gaming license.
She's pretty thorough. She probably knows what she's talking about, but we ought to find out.
We can check.
It certainly jumps out at me. That one certainly jumps out at me. Okay, so, but are you comfortable going forward on the scenario 1, right? Right. Do we need a vote on that, or can we just authorize
I
it?
think you delegated us authority to negotiate last time, so we're all set. We just wanted to answer the question that was outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing this. It's
Thank
helpful.
you.
It's helpful.
Thank you, John. Mr. Chairman, the next item is found under tab 6B, includes some brief financial reports for the Phase 1 investigation, slot application evaluation, Phase 2 costs, and a cash flow. Should be under 6B. I would like to note, as we start moving into this particular topic, as it relates to the cash flow summary, it's important for us to keep in mind that this update continues to reflect the Commission's ongoing assumption that we will need to bill regulatory costs that exceed the commission's available budget 30 days after the award of a license. And might also remind us that we do have an administrative regulation we drafted to form the foundation. That's 205 CMR 12101.
That's already in place that says within 30 days after
Yes.
license award, we will begin to assess?
Yes.
So I didn't realize, when you and I were talking about that, we don't think we knew that. Because I'm sorry that everybody's left, but I hope everybody's watching, because we want we want to make sure that the applicants who become licensees are not surprised that into their cash flow projections, they're going to need to see a pro rata share of our operating expenses within a month of the time the license is awarded. And I think somehow, I wish John were here, somehow we ought to make sure that hopefully they're watching this meeting, but
Actually, it deals with three areas within it. It deals with the research project, it deals with the number of slots,
Right.
and it deals with additional costs of regulation. So
Right.
it is there. What it doesn't do really have the mechanics in it. And so Derek and I have discussed, and Commissioner Zuniga, we're going to have a draft on the 21st, I believe, that will help explain the implementation, how we would intend to do
okay.
it.
So on the 21st, let's put that early in the meeting so everybody's still here. Because and otherwise I want to send a letter to everybody, I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. And as Commissioner Zuniga has pointed out, it needs to be factored into their cash flows, and it doesn't seem to be factored into the slots parlor application cash flows. And if it's because we haven't conveyed the point, then we've got a potential coming cropper here, so really important. I don't know if there's any way, Elaine, to do anything, but let's just make sure we really brew at that point around on the 21st.
21st, oh.
Yeah.
I'll put myself first this time instead of last a couple days.
Right, and just to not to put too fine a point on it, but our present cash flow that we're using to operate this, that you're gonna walk through with us, assumes we're gonna be getting $4 million from some number of licensees before the end of this fiscal year.
Right. You want Derek to briefly walk through those?
Yeah,
Those 3 areas?
I was just saying that, in case anybody's watching, $4 million this fiscal year.
Thank you, Commissioners. So I've prepared some documents. I think the cash flow is the one you want to walk through first. So we'll move to page, I think it's 5 in, under section 6B. And that actually walks through what the Commission's budget is. This does not include the racing division. We're just looking at casino operations. What you're looking at is our anticipated revenues, or what we've received for actuals for the first quarter, what we anticipate for the rest of the year, and then what our expenses are below that, actuals for the quarter and projections for the rest of the year. And as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, under number 6 on this schedule for revenues, you're looking at $4 million in projected revenues from our licensing activities. So once we actually license some people to move forward. We're looking at $2 million hitting in March, and then $2 additional million hitting in May and June, which would leave us with a balance of about $400,000 rolling into the next year. And this would all be part of writing up the regulation consistent with the statute that would be offset in the upcoming year. But the main costs that we have going right now are our investigations, our overhead, our rent, and our salaries. We're projecting to bring on 15 positions between now and February. Those positions are included in here. They are part of that cash flow basis. In an aggregate, I think there are about $500,000 in straight costs for this year, and an additional 130 some odd thousand in fringe costs, which would annualize out to about 1.4 next year with the loaded salary, so straight plus fringe on top of it. This is 14 days on the job. Taking a look at it, my best.
I was going to say, I
best,
can't tell you what a pleasure it is to begin to have John and Derek
Absolutely.
bite into this stuff. You know, it's a tremendous relief, and you bring great expertise and know-how, and it's really a relief to have you here to help us out.
And we would like to move towards developing the budget two ways, this way and the conventional state way, which is the accounting system that we're using right now. We are required to file annually with Ways and Means and A&F a spending plan, so I think if we report it this way, and I can show you a crosswalk between this and the state system.
I don't know that we need to. We can let you deal with the state system.
Okay.
Well, no, let me be a little bit more emphatic than Derek. I think we need to move into the state system. For some time we will continue to use this spreadsheet because it has been very useful. But when we utilize the MARS, the state system at its full potential, we will get reports literally at the drop of a button anytime we want to. We will be able to post a lot of our expenses periodically, as often as we want to, monthly, bi-weekly.
We could do it on a daily
We can
basis,
do it on a daily
as long as
basis.
the warehouse is updated.
Right. And that is certainly going to be a key feature when we are accounting for the revenues that come to the Commonwealth. But we start with our own expenses, and that's going to be also very, very important.
I said that too glibly. Believe it or not, I'm not really familiar with the way an agency budget looks.
Yeah.
So as long as the presentation format is a functional one, and I mean, I know when Marty Bennison does his two different annual reports, and you can't figure what's cash and what's accrual, and it's hard for me, at least from a businessman standpoint, to figure out how to read these things. But if the state system is something that we can turn into operational language, then that'd be great. The issue here is the qualifier we've been talking about, which is if the assumptions that we've been operating under hold, that is a slots license award in January and 2 casino license awards in April. If those assumptions hold, meaning we have these licensees in place to assess our costs, we're fine. But we've seen the world change pretty dramatically over the last few weeks, including a couple of days ago. And we don't know for sure how many applicants we're going to have or eventual licensees. We've got the surrounding community problem, which if it happens with possible delay, if it happens in category 1, it could kick into the next fiscal year. It could kick our decision-making into the next fiscal year. So I know that what Commissioner Zuniga's been talking about, and I think it's very important, is that we keep our fingers crossed and hope that these work, but that we do some contingency planning to think through what other strategies are there, what other cash generation or cash reserving, cash saving strategies can we have in place in the event that there's big changes in some of these schedules, any of which is possible. And I think this is great to have, and we'll all keep our fingers crossed and everything will be hunky-dory, but I think we would be prudent to maybe deputize Commissioner Zuniga and I, with your all help, to put some contingency plans in place just in case some of these suppositions don't hold.
I would certainly be in favor of that. I'm looking at these a lot more frequently than I was, especially since Derek is now come on board. But I think to state the obvious, perhaps our budget is getting tight. We continue to operate with the same assumptions, and there's a little bit of a cushion in a couple of instances here. For example, I'm projecting the first assessment to come in March, just in case surrounding community discussions get a little bit more than January 9, for example. But there's not a whole lot of wiggle room, and that's why we need to continue to look at it often and develop
we really kind of need two sets of contingencies. One is if there's big trouble, like, we don't have any licensees. You know, that's a whole different kettle of fish. If we've just got bumps and bruises, you know, then cash management might do the job. But, so we ought to look at it from both perspectives.
Yep.
There's something else I was gonna say about this, I don't know what it was. Oh, I know. Director Day has bitten the bullet on the assumption of targeted start date. And partly at my insistence that but we have one bidder who is saying that they could start in July if we made the award in January. There's some skepticism as to whether or not that's doable, and it's within our control to some extent because it depends upon a phased rollout. We haven't decided whether we'll permit a phased rollout. And even if they do a phased rollout, there's some skepticism whether those dates can be met. But maybe part of what you and I should be looking at is, do we need to hold ourselves to the target date that you've now got there, or could we prudently make some kind of an adjustment to that without running the risk that we pick somebody who actually is ready to go and we aren't? So that's worth thinking about.
I agree, Mr. Chairman, that right now we're targeting around 7/14 in my plans anyway for
Right.
agency development. So
I
if
heard-
commissioners are changing their mind or think
Right.
that might be appropriate, it'd be a good time.
I heard the lawyer from Rainham say October, and I went, yes, they postponed their schedule by 3 months. And then Carney corrected it. No, it's August 1st. Okay, more with this?
No, except if you want to have any questions. Actually, I'll just mention a couple of things. So embedded in these costs are updated numbers, notably from the licensing system. You will notice it here in item 2.4 or just below in the projection. As well as I've revised, in order to fit that cost that was not anticipated as high, I've taken out performance management effort that we had budgeted for but thought that it would start in the spring. Given the conditions now, I'm suggesting we think about it for the start of the next fiscal year, which is not too far off, but at least it's not considered in this projection. That's the main changes. When these went to print, I had 5 applicants for category 1. That may or may not be the case as of Tuesday.
Right.
We'll see.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Another thing
Sorry,
also,
yes, yeah.
if there's any questions, there's an update on the expenditures that Derek prepared.
Yes, there's an update on Category 1 and Category 2 licenses, the status, total revenue collected to date, and total anticipated costs. It's not the actual costs. And we want to recognize that what we're recommending to collect in revenue exceeds what our anticipated costs are, but there's a reason for that. We have already collected $350,000 for a Region C applicant that's sitting in our account right now, so I just want to give you a total picture of revenue collected. Some of the Phase 2, Category 2 investigations came in under the cost of the initial estimates of our consultants, and we collected revenue for that amount. At the end of the process, we'll do a final reconciliation and give back to the applicants the amounts that they need to get, as well as we're bringing in our 13.71% overhead. So that's why you see us recommending coming on with a new billed amount of $1.1 million to the applicants.
Right.
We weren't paying ourselves initially, and that's a significant amount of money. If you look at page 2, it's about $1.4 million that we hadn't paid ourselves for.
But you've taken that into consideration
Correct.
in the other cash flow?
Correct. We have.
Okay. Great.
Any questions? Or?
Well, the Phase 1 investigations, these are still not, are
They're
these?
not complete.
They're still not complete, right?
No, this is as good as, this is the best information we have as of October 25th.
But will it be north of 12.5, do you think? or just
No.
change?
Maybe
There might
north
be
of
a little bit.
11.8. What we're doing.
Oh, I see, the collections, yes,
Yeah.
cost, yeah, got it.
What, the 10.4 is the latest forecast. Some of those numbers have not been expended in
Right.
total, but the forecasts have been changing, although many of them are done, so, or close to being
Tell
done.
them to use their vendor investigation teams.
That's right.
Okay, that's really great.
Mr. Chairman, there are the two evaluation issues, and I
Yeah.
can just hit them real quick, but you might want to move them to the 14th. And let me just hit the first one was the questions, and Commissioner McHugh was actually originated these questions. And what it was is, how do we need to handle instances where the evaluation teams identify information that is not part of the host community agreement, but is included in the application? And then the second part of that question is information that was stated in the applicant presentations or otherwise publicly discussed, but it's not in the application. So I summarize it as conflicts really between the application and the public. And then also some clarification regarding clarification the teams may be requesting to the applicants, as opposed to the questions the commission itself will ask the applicants during its host community. So those were, Commissioner McHugh thought those issues deserve some discussion, but what I can do is just want to leave them with you, and we can take them back up, time permits.
Did you include this list? Was that in those three things you said?
No.
This is
that's the list.
another, okay, fine, all right.
And what it is the Pekin Company have developed a list of possible changes from category 1 questions. It's entirely up to you, but if you wish, we could, I could work with Pekin Company and Catherine, we could take a look at this and kind of fine tune it and bring it back on the 14th.
Well, let's do that. I think you're right but Jim's participation in at least those first three is really important, and actually these two, because a lot of these came from him. And I haven't read these, and I would like to. So if we're going to make revisions, we need to do it quickly so that the applicants have a chance to do it, but I think another week isn't going to kill that. Did you want to say something, Jennifer?
Just one thing, I think the revisions to the questions are three categories. One is to get data in such a way as we can make comparisons.
You don't need any permission to do that. I mean, just do it.
The second is to get sufficient information so that we can understand the applicant's response to the questions. The experience with the category 2 is some of those responses are very skimpy. And the third one is to get information, to clarify the intent of the question somewhat. Now, the piece of paper that was in your packet today is still evolving, or was still evolving, but we put it as a placeholder. Since then, we have more comprehensive and better edited thing. And what I would be happy to do, if we need to, is send it out in advance so people can look at it.
Yeah, please.
And that way we don't spend a lot of time next time, so that we can send it out. And I will say the comment you made about just requesting data in a different kind of way, we actually have already done that.
Right.
For both the financial and economic development.
Right.
Yeah, we found out that a template was very helpful, which is now referenced here.
Right, that's great.
So we will plan to bring those two items back to the commission.
Correct.
On the 14th.
And just a point, I think I found, at least in my section, we may have been duplicative in asking for information, too much of the question based on the statute, but we also asked for the same information under a separate question. So it involves either some refining and/or working with the applicant to help us address where you put the information once and where you can just refer to it a second time.
You've already made those are things you've already suggested?
We did come up with a spreadsheet, but I'm going to go back through and look at the economic development question.
Yeah, because I think for the category 1s, we can make enough change, we can do these changes, so let's go ahead and make those changes if you've got it.
I do think that there's the way the questions are asked we might be able to combine them a little differently. The other recommendation
I think what we want to be sensitive a little bit is it is an existing application, and Category 1 applicants, we hope, have been working on it during this time, because when we get done, they'll only have about 2 weeks to get the application in.
Right. Yeah, it's revisions and clarifications. That consolidation is a little different, you know, I'm not sure about that, but, yeah. Do I have a motion? So moved. All in favor?
I wanna
Aye.
stay.
Ayes have it.
Anything else?
7-0.